Book the Last, Chapter 2 of Armadale. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nadine Eckert-Boulet. Armadale by Wilkie Collins. Chapter 2. In the House. Noticing Mr. Bashwood's confusion, after a moment's glance at the change in his personal appearance, Midwinter spoke first. "I see I have surprised you," he said. "You are looking, I suppose, for somebody else? Have you heard from Allan? Is he on his way home again already?" The inquiry about Allan, though it would naturally have suggested itself to any one in Midwinter's position at that moment, added to Mr. Bashwood's confusion. Not knowing how else to extricate himself from the critical position in which he was placed, he took refuge in simple denial. "I know nothing about Mr. Armadale. Oh, dear, no, sir! I know nothing about Mr. Armadale," he answered, with needless eagerness and hurry. "Welcome back to England, sir," he went on, changing the subject in his nervously talkative manner. "I didn't know you had been abroad. It's so long since we have had the pleasure since I have had the pleasure. Have you enjoyed yourself, sir, in foreign parts?" "Such different manners from ours! Yes, 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 such different manners from ours! Do you make a long stay in England, now you have come back?" "I hardly know," said Midwinter. "I have been obliged to alter my plans, and to come to England unexpectedly." He hesitated a little. His manner changed, and he added, in lower tones, "A serious anxiety has brought me back. I can't say what my plans will be until that anxiety is set at rest." The light of a lamp fell on his face while he spoke, and Mr. Bashwood observed, for the first time, that he looked sadly worn and changed. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm sure I'm very sorry. If I could be of any use," suggested Mr. Bashwood, speaking under the influence in some degree of his nervous politeness, and in some degree of his remembrance of what Midwinter had done for him at Thorpe Ambrose in the bygone time. Midwinter thanked him and turned away sadly. "I am afraid you can be of no use, Mr. Bashwood; but I am obliged to you for your offer, all the same." He stopped, and considered a little. "Suppose she should not be ill? Suppose some misfortune should have happened?" he resumed, speaking to himself, and turning again toward the steward. "If she has left her mother, some trace of her might be found by inquiring at Thorpe Ambrose." Mr. Bashwood's curiosity was instantly aroused. The whole sex was interesting to him now, for the sake of Miss Gwilt. "A lady, sir?" he inquired. "Are you looking for a lady?" "I am looking," said Midwinter, simply, "for my wife." "Married, sir!" exclaimed Mr. Bashwood. "Married since I last had the pleasure of seeing you? Might I take the liberty of asking—" Midwinter's eyes dropped uneasily to the ground. "You knew the lady in former times," he said. "I have married Miss Gwilt." The steward started back as he might have started back from a loaded pistol leveled at his head. His eyes glared as if he had suddenly lost his senses, and the nervous trembling to which he was subject shook him from head to foot. "What's the matter?" said Midwinter. There was no answer. "What is there so very startling," he went on, a little impatiently, "in Miss Gwilt's being my wife?" "Your wife?" repeated Mr. Bashwood, helplessly. "Mrs. Armadale—" He checked himself by a desperate effort, and said no more. The stupor of astonishment which possessed the steward was instantly reflected in Midwinter's face. The name in which he had secretly married his wife had passed the lips of the last man in the world whom he would have dreamed of admitting into his confidence. He took Mr. Bashwood by the arm, and led him away to a quieter part of the terminus than the part of it in which they had hitherto spoken to each other. "You referred to my wife just now," he said, and you spoke of Mrs. Armadale in the same breath. What do you mean by that?" Again there was no answer. Utterly incapable of understanding more than that he had involved himself in some serious complication which was a complete mystery to him, Mr. Bashwood struggled to extricate himself from the grasp that was laid on him, and struggled in vain. Midwinter sternly repeated the question. "I ask you again," he said, "what do you mean by it?" "Nothing, sir! I give you my word of honor, I meant nothing!" He felt the hand on his arm tightening its grasp. He saw, even in the obscurity of the remote corner in which they stood, that Midwinter's fiery temper was rising, and was not to be trifled with. The extremity of his danger inspired him with the one ready capacity that a timid man possesses when he is compelled by main force to face an emergency, the capacity to lie. "I only meant to say, sir," he burst out, with a desperate effort to look and speak confidently, "that Mr. Armadale would be surprised—" "You said Mrs. Armadale." "No, sir! On my word of honor, on my sacred word of honor, you are mistaken. You are, indeed. I said Mr. Armadale. How could I say anything else? Please to let me go, sir. I'm pressed for time. I do assure you I'm dreadfully pressed for time." For a moment longer, Midwinter maintained his hold, and in that moment he decided what to do. He had accurately stated his motive for returning to England as proceeding from anxiety about his wife, anxiety naturally caused, after the regular receipt of a letter from her every other or every third day, by the sudden cessation of the correspondence between them, on her side, for a whole week. The first vaguely terrible suspicion of some other reason for her silence than the reason of accident or of illness, to which he had hitherto attributed it, had struck through him like a sudden chill the instant he heard the steward associate the name of Mrs. Armadale with the idea of his wife. Little irregularities in her correspondence with him, which he had thus far only thought strange, now came back on his mind, and proclaimed themselves to be suspicions as well. He had hitherto believed the reasons she had given for referring him, when he answered her letters, to no more definite address than an address at a post office. Now he suspected her reasons of being excuses for the first time. He had hitherto resolved, on reaching London, to inquire at the only place he knew of at which a clew to her could be found, the address she had given him as the address at which her mother lived. Now, with a motive which he was afraid to define even to himself, but which was strong enough to overbear every other consideration in his mind, he determined, before all things, to solve the mystery of Mr. Bashwood's familiarity with a secret, which was a marriage secret between himself and his wife. Any direct appeal to a man of the steward's disposition, in the steward's present state of mind, would be evidently useless. The weapon of deception was, in this case, a weapon literally forced into Midwinter's hands. He let go of Mr. Bashwood's arm, and accepted Mr. Bashwood's explanation. "I beg your pardon," he said. "I have no doubt you are right. Pray attribute my rudeness to over anxiety and over fatigue. I wish you good evening." The station was by this time almost a solitude, the passengers by the train being assembled at the examination of their luggage in the custom house waiting room. It was no easy matter, ostensibly to take leave of Mr. Bashwood, and really to keep him in view. But Midwinter's early life with the gypsy master had been of a nature to practice him in such stratagems as he was now compelled to adopt. He walked away toward the waiting room by the line of empty carriages, opened the door of one of them, as if to look after something that he had left behind, and detected Mr. Bashwood making for the cab rank on the opposite side of the platform. In an instant, Midwinter had crossed, and had passed through the long row of vehicles, so as to skirt it on the side furthest from the platform. He entered the second cab by the left-hand door the moment after Mr. Bashwood had entered the first cab by the right-hand door.